Empire. With the reopening of school comes the intramural leagues returning to play ball.
I think most schools view this first and foremost as a service for their fans and for their parents. That's what they want to provide this access.
That's David Rudolph, CEO of PlayOn Sports and the Nfhs Network, where the pandemic changed how schools looked at engagement. This is the Future Sport Podcast. I'm Bram Weinstein. There was a lot happening in and around high school sports during the 2020-2021 seasons. Some schools shut down athletics, others played on without crowds. Even some cloaked themselves as private teams with the same roster just to have the games. Now that school seems to be heading for a reopening this fall, leagues should be back up and running, but in the interim, the availability of their content, however they went about playing, turned into a door that swung wide open for those who could provide it. Our guest this week is the CEO of the Nfhs Network and PlayOn Sports, David Rudolph. As we are heading out of a pandemic, teams are getting back onto the field, and hopefully by this fall, things will feel semi-normal again. Hey, David, how are you?
Good, Bram. How are you?
We're doing great. All right, so take me through from your point of view, and for those who need an introduction to the Nfhs Network, you guys produce and stream tons of high school athletics from around the country. Can you kind of take me through what the last year has been like as we're going jurisdiction to jurisdiction about what teams are and are not allowed to do?
Yeah, for sure. And like with anything, it's different from state to state. But I would say the good news is now that we've gotten into the spring season, almost every state, if not every state, has resumed normal play for those, especially those spring outdoor sports. What's been a little bit unique in kind of the back half of the winter and some of the spring is some of the states that deferred or canceled fall sports are now playing those as well. So, we've never had football in March and April before, but we've had that this year. And basketball in some states is going to be played into June. So there's still a little bit of juggling of the sports seasons. But for the most part, kids are back playing out on the field, competing for their high schools, and under relatively normal conditions in terms of number of games and rounds of playoffs and all that.
For you, did all the shuffling of the schedules make much of a difference over the last year, or you were kind of at the ready for whenever the schools and the districts were going to allow play to occur?
A bit of both. I mean, look, I'd never say that sports getting shifted around is as traumatic as what, our general society went through over the last 12 to 15 months. But it was very chaotic at the beginning of the school year. And look, high school sports, it follows just the general what schools are going to do. If schools are in session, kids are going to play sports because there's scientific evidence that having those sports and activities is one of the things that keeps that age group the most engaged in school, keeps them attending and keeps their grades higher. So what we knew is that if schools locked in their plans to return to education, that would largely dictate what they were going to do from a sports perspective. And that played out. So you had about 2/3 of the states who resumed schedules somewhat normally in the fall. Some of them kind of pushed back a month or 2 months. Because they resumed in-person education. And then you had about 1/3 of the states who pushed things off till later, till December or January. So, once that got locked in, the schedules were pretty set. But then you had all the COVID cancellations and postponements and stuff. So week to week and day to day, it was certainly pretty chaotic. And even if you had a game scheduled on a Thursday that was going to be played the following day on a Friday, there was no guarantee it was going to happen. But all in all, the schools, I think, did a great job of communicating the information, even in their worst shifts. Our system and platform is kind of set up to adjust to that. So I think all things considered, it went about as well as could be expected.
All right, so you could be actually the bearer of good news here because you have to know or at least have information about what's coming down the pike. And listen, this summer, I'm seeing more and more people at NBA playoff games. And here locally for me outside of Washington, D.C., the Washington Nationals are going to have full capacity in a couple of weeks. And they've already announced University of Maryland, Washington football team, Baltimore Ravens could have full capacity this fall. So are you working on the assumption that we are everybody back in school and we're playing sports at a normal time come September?
Yes, I'd be very surprised if that's not if that doesn't happen. Again, it's on a state by state and even local by local decision on that. But all indications are school will resume on a normal schedule and in person next year, and sports will return to playing on a normal schedule. Kind of the sports in the right season that they're traditionally played, starting at the same time that they traditionally start and playing a full season. So, and on top of it, I think we'll resume either, full attendance or certainly, not have the same kind of restrictions that a lot of places had this year in terms of attendance. So I think next school year for high school sports will feel back to normal, as back to normal can get after going through a 18-month pandemic.
Talk to me about engagement a little bit with your network. Obviously, everybody was home, and this was unusual, but there were sports that were happening. And did you see growth on your platform in terms of engagement because of the lack of accessibility?
We did, yeah. I mean, it was kind of shocking. The first indication we got was last summer, so kind of July and August, as schools really started to lock in their plans for return to in-person education. And, a lot of administrators, I think at that point were like, oh my gosh, we're going to be playing sports, but we're either going to have no attendance or limited attendance. We've got to have a plan for streaming. And so, what I would say, most folks in the high school ecosystem viewed streaming before this as a nice to have, and just overnight it became a must have. So the first change in demand we saw was at the school level. Just, the surge of schools who not only wanted a solution, but were desperate for a solution, went through the roof. So, just to give you some numbers, we were working with a little over 2,000 schools last summer. And when we wrap up this school year, we'll be at about 8,000 schools.
Huh.
We've never seen anything like that. We've been doing this a long time, and it's, 9 years, I think, 8 years, and took that long to get to 2,000 schools, and then, quadruple that number in less than 12 months. So that was the first surge we saw, with schools really needed it. And that's where we had to hire up and add a ton of resources just to make sure we could help them get these games produced. The next question then was, what was the consumer demand going to be like? And we assumed it would be higher, just because, in a lot of places people either couldn't attend at all or the attendance options were very limited. And it grew. It was probably up on a per game basis this year, 40 to 50%, something like that. So definitely grew. But most of our growth this year has just come from, 4 times the number of schools are now streaming their games than a year ago. And then add on top of that, on a per game basis, 40 to 50% or more are watching. So it's been a big year.
So, obviously the pandemic accelerated people's desire to have this type of access and technology involved in their programs. Considering how many came to you, what do you think their reluctance was pre-pandemic to be part of the future of content distribution?
When you hear folks who express, a specific reason, I'd say it typically the only thing that you hear is, hey, I don't want to broadcast my games, again, whether it's on TV or streaming or whatever, because I'm concerned it's going to affect my attendance. High school programs, the funding for it are very dependent upon their gate revenues. That's, makes up the vast majority of their revenue beyond the fundraising or the fees that the players pay to participate in that sort of thing. We hear that off and on kind of over the years. That's kind of a pretty consistent theme. But it's in the minority. I think most folks recognize that, streaming a game or watching a game, especially at the high school level, it doesn't replace the experience of attending it in person. what it's for is for those fans who are displaced and don't have a chance to go to the game. Whether they're traveling or frequently, it's the folks who are out of town, parents and grandparents and extended relatives who can't come to the game. Or for the home fans who want to follow the team and see them when they're on the road, playing a game that's an hour or two away that they're just not going to be able to attend in person. So, all the evidence points to there is zero impact on gate from streaming. It actually helps to grow your fan base. But there's still a kind of a small percentage of folks. I'd say the primary reason folks don't do it is just there was no driving reason why they had to. So that was, I don't want to call it lethargic, but it was just inertia. If you haven't done it in the past, what this has done, this has obviously pulled that forward several years. And now that it's in place, it's here to stay. We've already seen it in this year that there's now an expectation for fans that they want to have access to every game that they can attend, and it's not just the varsity games. We saw the demand for JV and freshman games across all sports just explode this year. Like we saw that grow faster than kind of the varsity games. So parents want to have that ease and accessibility and be able to watch their kids' games, and fans want to be able to do the same thing. So that's the biggest change is you will now see going forward, there's an expectation that every high school game should be streamed, not wow, wouldn't that be cool or wouldn't it be nice if that game.
Are you good with people? Maybe you're organized or have a knack for numbers. Well, then chances are you've got skills that could lead to a new career. A Google Career Certificate can help you get a foot in the door with top employers in fast-growing fields like IT support, project management, data analytics, and user experience design. It's professional-level training developed and taught by Google employees, and it's all online so you can learn around your schedule. Put your skills to work. Go to grow.google/certificates.
Talk to me about quality. As you put together now, you just exponentially change the amount of schools that you're helping and servicing. I'm sure as a network and as an organizer and as a content provider, you want the best quality that you can give to them. How do you think through doing that with this kind of massive upsurge in demand for your service?
Yeah, quality is always relative, but there's a certain level that you've got to achieve. And so, what we talk about internally and we talk about with schools is the good enough. And so good enough, the definition we put on it there is that the viewing experience at home has to be equal to or better than the viewing experience being in the stadium. So if you think of it, when you're in a stadium, I can generally see the full field. I can see the action. I can, follow what's going on. I can see the scoreboard, so I know where we are in the game and what the score is and kind of what's happening there. And I hear enough audio feedback to give me additional clues as to what's going on. That's the bare minimum of what the streaming experience has to do. So it's got to follow the action. It's got to provide the scoreboard information, and you've got to have some sort of audio feedback. Above that is, what everyone expects from the broadcast that they see on TV. So multiple angles on from cameras and replay and play-by-play and color commentary. Those are kind of standard from a TV standpoint. And, ultimately, we would love to see every game have all of that. That's not realistic. At the volume of games we're talking about, that's not realistic. So as long as every game kind of meets that bare minimum, and then some schools decide to add more production elements, that's kind of the consumer experience that we're shooting for. It's just to make sure that the viewing experience from home is the equivalent of what it's like being there in the stadium and the experience you'd have in that environment.
As you know, and we've talked to on this podcast a number of different groups and CEOs of groups that are building out technological solutions with cameras and automation that they could potentially up the production with some training and obviously an investment by the school, which I think is probably prohibitive, but you probably know better. Do you see stuff like that coming down the line where the production quality because of technology could be changed? Not across the board, but by a number of schools that want something that feels a little closer to what they see of a televised game?
No question. I mean, you will At the high school space, and this is not just high school, I would say this is, kind of any game that's in I'll put it in the niche. That production of those games is going to transition over the next decade to be almost completely automated production. It's the only way to do it at scale at any sort of efficiency and unit economics that makes sense. The great news with that is that technology is only going to continue to increase, and the algorithms and the software that are used to drive that and produce games and add some of the production features are only going to increase. So 100%. I mean, those cameras that we're installing now, they're all 4K, so just the quality of the core image is there that we can deliver to the consumer, and then from there it's all just software. It's easy for me to say it's all just software.
Right.
It's simple. There's some really complicated math and AI and computer vision stuff behind it, but again, that will change. Those are software upgrades. Those aren't hardware upgrades, and that will occur. And probably, I said 10 years. Probably occur much faster. I think you'll see a bunch of developments on that front, even within the next 5 years.
All right. So like a school could invest in something like that. If there's enough competition, the costs come down, it becomes automated. They have a better quality. Like clearly, Texas high school football probably garners pretty big audiences for the major programs there. California is probably the same. Florida is probably the same. The general program, even on high profile sports, how do they kind of view what they can get out of the experience if they kind of know that, singularly in each of their silos, their audience is small?
Correct. That's the key. I think even for the biggest programs and the biggest sports, the relative audience, especially compared to any of the tier one stuff, the NFL, NBA, the audience on a per game basis is very small in comparison. I think most schools view this first and foremost as a service for their fans and for their parents. That's what they want to provide this access. And again, for the parent who can't be there because they're traveling or on the road or at another kid's activity or game, or for the parent who's out of town or the extended family who's out of town, it's a great convenience and a really nice thing to have. I think that's their first and foremost driver from this. With it, I think like anything, if there's revenue associated with it, I think they want to be compensated for their content and their rights, and that's a part of this. So, some schools generate tens of thousands of dollars in terms of revenue from this, and that's money that they can use to. In those cases, they probably don't need the money so much in football, but they can use to fund some of their other sports. So there is a monetary component to it, but I would say that's not the driver for the overwhelming majority of schools. That they're looking at this from the fan experience and fan access standpoint to make sure that those folks can see the games that they're not able to attend in person.
Obviously with the pandemic going on, and I know this has been going on, but I want to give you the opportunity to talk a little bit about the high school support program, because you've given millions back to the schools since your company's inception. And obviously this has been a very trying year for everybody, and certainly for thin budgets in all sorts of jurisdictions for public high schools. Do you want to talk about the high school support program for a moment?
Sure. That was what we launched over the summer in response to seeing this increased need for a streaming solution. And so, with that many schools trying to start a streaming program from scratch, it's really hard to pull together a crew who's going to come out and cover 200 games a year, which is roughly what takes place when you do varsity and JV across the football, basketball, baseball, softball, lacrosse, soccer, volleyball, wrestling. It's 200 to 300 per school, and so that's hard to pull together a crew of whether it's students or parents or just to make sure all those games get covered. So what we did is we completely eliminated the price for the automated camera technology that we have, and we use Pixelite. I think you've talked to them before.
Yeah.
And so we took that price to zero and said any school in the U.S. that wanted 2 of those cameras, we would provide them for free. So I can't remember the numbers, but I think it's been well over 10,000 cameras that we've distributed for free this year. So that was the first part. And then we upped the revenue share and the ability for fans to make direct donations to schools as well when they were subscribing. And so, that's generated tens of millions of dollars that have gone back directly to high schools this year. So we didn't know when we offered it what the uptake on either of those would be, but it's been phenomenal. We're glad we could play a small part in helping out with this. Certainly what the high schools have gone through just in trying to figure out in-person education and all the complexity that goes with that. They've certainly been through a lot worse than a lot of folks have. So we were very happy to have a small part in it and glad that it helped some of these, both from an access standpoint and from a financial standpoint.
It's very cool. David Rudolph is the CEO of the Nfhs Network and PlayOn Sports. Thank you so much for joining us, David.
Thank you, Bram. Good to be with you.
This episode is brought to you by Wine.com. The days of standing in the wine aisle, staring aimlessly at a wall of wine without a clue, are over. Go to Wine.com and pick the perfect bottle with confidence every time. Filter your search by price and professional ratings, read reviews, and even chat with real wine experts for recommendations. It's the world's largest wine store delivered to your door. And if you sign up for a stewardship membership, you'll get free shipping year-round on every order. Get $50 off your first order by going to wine.com/Spotify. Terms apply. This episode is brought to you by Simply by Frito-Lay. You have enough on your plate, but now there's one less thing to overthink with Simply by Frito-Lay. It's your favorite Frito-Lay snacks with ingredients to feel good about, like Simply Blue Corn Tostitos, Sea Salted Ruffles, and White Cheddar Cheetos Puffs. All made with no artificial flavors or colors. So enjoy what you love and look for Simply brand snacks online or at a store near you.
On the next Future Sport podcast, former American national soccer team member Eddie Lewis discusses the state of the game and his latest endeavor to grow its reach, Toca football.
I think today, you're seeing, some of the top athletes in America choosing to play soccer because they're now seeing the opportunities, right? As the MLS emerged and there was a path to professional soccer, right? That was a big step in the right direction.
That will do it for this episode. As always, the future is now. This is the Future Sport Podcast. I'm Bram Weinstein. The Future Sport Podcast is brought to you by 3Advance, developers of sports tech apps that are AI-powered and UX-focused. So if you're looking to create some apps for your startup or your sports biz calls for some artificial or business intelligence, you should check out 3Advance. They're incredible. Go to 3advance.com. That's the number 3advance.com.